Alright, so back at this thing, realized there was some mistakes made, and some people pointed out some things in the comments on the last video that I did not do right. And while I was pulling this apart, I realized that these caps are also on backwards. I went back to my original video and referenced these caps. I have them on the right sides, but they're both flipped the wrong direction, so that there's little arrows on them. They're pointed in. When I took them off, they were pointed out. So somewhere in there, after I took them off, I moved them around the garage and forgot the orientation, but I did have them on the right sides. The other thing is, someone pointed out that I don't have the carrier bearings pressed on all the way. So I ended up using a flat piece to press them on, and it put it flush with the end of the carrier, which it's actually supposed to be on a little farther than that. So here's the one that I pulled out, and you can see that the race is actually seated a little farther than the outside of the carrier, and I have it flush right now. So that might have lasted a little while, but probably not very long. Especially once it heated up, it would probably drive the carrier all the way over to the driver's side. So I did measure the gap, and I do have a 39 thousandths gap on the driver's side in between the race and the carrier, and I have a 31 thousandths gap on the passenger side. So I'm also wondering if that's why the factory shims didn't fit back in there, because there was a spot in the last video where I said that they didn't fit and I had to remake both shim packs. So I did add the gaps to the measurements that I had before and compare it to the factory shim set. The factory shim set measured at like 549, and then I added the gap to the shim packs that I have now, and that comes out to like 512. So it looks like the factory shim packs are even a little bit thicker than what I have in there now. But I'm gonna see if I can get the factory shims in there and go from there. And there was another comment about how easily this thing was coming in and out, and now that I actually lift it up after holding it down, it actually does come out way easier than what I thought. When I was messing with it, I had to pry it out, so this is actually probably a good thing that I'm re-going through all this again, because this does actually come out quite a bit easier than what I thought when I was putting it together. Another thing that someone pointed out too is that this ridge here is actually supposed to go to the outside, and it's for holding the shim pack in place, which makes sense. I thought that it went on the inside and then held it on the bearing, but that doesn't make a lot of sense, that would actually go outward and hold the shim pack from moving around. So I appreciate you guys leaving comments and steering me in the right direction there. The comment section can be a brutal place sometimes, but a lot of times there's good information that comes out of it. So thanks for speaking up and pointing that out, because it probably would have destroyed this thing pretty quick. Alright, so I got this one pressed on now, and you can't see any gap between there. I used a really thin feeler gauge and there's no gap. But you can see how the top has this little ridge sticking out. It's not flush. The bearing race isn't flush anymore. So that was the difference. And here's the other side. You can see how much of a difference there is underneath that. That's a pretty huge gap there. So I'm just using the old bearing race off the old carrier. And there you can really see the gap on this side. And now you see no gap. So yeah, it seems like a really small change, but that probably would have been a big problem. So now there's no gap underneath. I do have the ridge all the way around. Now what I want to try to do is get this thing in there with the factory shims. Well, that one must be a little too tight. I just broke the shim, so we'll try to keep the factory driver side shim in and then shim the passenger side pack now and see where we end up with that one. As I mentioned before, it was about 40 thousandths bigger than the shim pack makeup that I had in there before, so. Alright, so I'm going to use the factory driver side shim, and then I have this shim pack made up, and I have the lip flange going out holding the other shims. So this one's about 30 thousandths smaller than the factory passenger side shim. that one's probably too loose. Just flop right in there. But I feel like that's probably going to be pretty close. Alright, so factory passenger side shim was 280. The one I just had in there was 250. Alright, so I'm going to try this one. This one's at like 269, 270, so it's 10 thousandths smaller than the factory one that wouldn't go in there. Yeah, and that feels decent with the factory driver's side. Yep, and that makes a lot more sense with that flange being out, because then it holds all the other shims. That makes a lot more sense, because the cap holds the inner shim with the flange, and then the outer one would actually hold the shims. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Alright, so this is the first test with the factory driver's side shim in there. And look where we end up. Like right at 28. So that's like 11 thousandths. 28 is 11 thousandths, 27 is like a 10.6. So just with putting the factory shim in there, it ends up like pretty much perfect. So a lot of messing around for nothing yesterday, but glad you guys pointed that stuff out in the comments. I was able to do this, and I feel a lot better about this now. Like maybe won't destroy it right away. So thanks for the help. I'm gonna button this thing back up and paint it and get it in the car. That's a little hard to read, but the factory shims are at $549, both of them together, and then my shim pack I had in there was $442. So then if you added on what the bearings were pressed in, 39 on the driver's side and 31 on the passenger side, that would come out to $512 after removing those gaps. So I took 10 thousandths off the passenger side shim, so that would be $539. So that's still 27 thousandths more shim in it than I had before, even accounting for the pressing the bearings on farther. So there's more preload on the bearings. They're a lot tighter in there, because the whole shim pack total is 27 thousandths more than what I had in there yesterday. Yeah, I think it's in a lot better spot now.